What an exciting day. Today we're going to be announcing the launch of PowerBuilder 2019, as well as demonstrating some of its key new features. We're also very thankful that so many of you showed up to show your support for what we're doing with PowerBuilder. PowerBuilder 2019 offers the fastest path to C# and the cloud. Today's webinar is being presented by myself, Armin Mazda, the CEO of Appeon, as well as a guest speaker, Bruce Armstrong, who's one of Appeon's community MVPs. So before we talk about PowerBuilder 2019, I'd just like to outline our vision for PowerBuilder. For quite some time, we've been presenting this diagram, which is a bird's eye view of the architecture we envision for future PowerBuilder applications. As you can see, there's still a client and a server, but the architecture of the client and server has changed. Namely, the server side is more than just your data and your database, but actually hosts your business logic, which is exposed as REST web APIs to a variety of clients, including a PowerBuilder desktop app as your client. Now, today's a very monumental day because PowerBuilder 2019 implements the majority of our vision, especially an area that has been really lacking for quite some time, the ability to create REST web APIs with PowerBuilder and the productivity of PowerBuilder. So starting in PowerBuilder 2019, you'll be able to develop in C# using the productivity of data window technology. We provide you a .NET data store to serve as your data access object or a model store. And these all deploy on the .NET Core. So that means you're not only limited to running on iOS or Windows operating system. You can take advantage of Kestrel, you could run on Linux, or you could even go with serverless, for example, using Amazon's Lambda. And your business logic will be exposed as REST web APIs to your PowerBuilder desktop app, as well as any other client that you like to use that's capable of calling a REST JSON web API. Now, what we plan on doing after PowerBuilder 2019 is to improve the PowerScript desktop app so it's very easy to deploy over a cloud architecture. So what do we mean by that? What we're talking is that you would have a very thin PowerScript app rather than a fat client. This PowerScript app would be web installed and it would automatically be updated. But you don't need to wait for this. You can already begin taking advantage of the REST client that has been added in PowerBuilder 2019 to have your existing desktop apps consume the new REST web APIs that you could create with PowerBuilder 2019. So what's new in PowerBuilder 2019 compared to 2017? Well, it's really going to give you the fastest path for your existing applications and your PowerBuilder developers to move to .NET and with a cloud architecture. Of course, we're still providing the PowerScript IDE, which allows you to create a front end for web APIs or continue doing traditional client-server architecture. And we've actually enhanced this. One major feature we've added in 2019 is something called UI themes, which allows you to modernize the look and feel of your application in a codeless fashion. And what's totally new in the box is a brand new C# IDE, which you'd be using for developing non-visual C# projects. When we say non-visual, mean, for example, web APIs or non-visual assemblies. And also included are .NET data access objects. And the data store you may be familiar with, that's powered with data window technology, but we've moved it forward. We've taken the data window technology, made it so it's compatible with an MVC architecture, made it so it's cloud deployable, and made it so it's 100% managed code compatible with the .NET Core. The .NET Core is fantastic because it's Microsoft's cross-OS open source .NET framework with super high performance. And we also provide a model store, which is an alternative to the data store that is created without using the data window painter. Now, another major thing included in PowerBuilder 2019 is a C# migration solution. We understand you have heavy investments in data windows, in PowerScript, and we want you to benefit from cloud architecture. And so we're providing a migration solution which consists of tools and frameworks for migrating NVOs that you've already have in PowerScript to C# with an MVC architecture. And so the C# IDE plus the data access objects plus the migration solution is really what's going to help you to move from PowerBuilder to the cloud, and also is the biggest difference between PowerBuilder 2017 and PowerBuilder 2019. Now, I want to talk a little more about the C# migration solution because our migration solution is not 100% automatic, and some people will be wondering, well, why not just rewrite it? Well, according to research by Gartner, an IT project that has a budget of over $1 million US dollars has a 50% greater chance to fail than a smaller project that is below $350,000. So although you do have to do some manual work to migrate your NVOs to C# Web APIs, the project is far simpler, far smaller than a rewrite, which increases your chance of succeeding greatly as well as saving costs. So that's why we put a lot of effort to create a migration solution that includes a data window migration tool that will automatically migrate your existing data windows to C# data models that can be used by the .NET Data Store. We provide an object called SQL Executor, which essentially allows you to copy and paste your embedded SQL over to your C# Web API project if you are using any embedded SQL in your NVOs. And the way the .NET Data Store works is very, very similar to the PowerScript Data Store, supporting the same properties, events, functions, same data buffers, same transaction mechanisms. So really, it's a port of the PowerScript to the C#. It's not a total rewrite or different design. Now, all of this is a do-it-yourself port. We provide you the tools, the frameworks, and it's designed to be used by PowerBuilder developers. So you'll be able to do this on your own without having to involve a third party or spending a lot of money on outsourced services. Now, the result out of this migration process is pure C# data store objects, which follows an MVC design. So the C# IDE, when you scaffold a project, is going to by default create that MVC structure for you. And these are pure C# projects, so they can be maintained in any IDE that supports the C# language. Of course, the data store is a complex object, and you're probably going to get greater productivity by using the data window painter to maintain that. But in no way is the project locked down to the PowerBuilder IDE itself. And you'll be able to deploy to the .NET Core, and as I mentioned, that's important because it's high performance, open source, and cross OS. And all of these things would be exposed as REST Web APIs, so it could be consumed by any client, including your current PowerBuilder desktop application. So let's take a look at a code example. Here's a little bit of PowerScript code that was taken from an NVO. Very simple one, but just illustrate the concept. We have a data window called deorder customer, and below you'll see the C# that would be the result of the port. This is what you would write inside the service of your MVC architecture. And as you can see, even though it's C#, it's not very nasty. It's very similar to PowerScript. It's few lines of code and simple to write. Now let's take a look at if you were writing C# not using PowerBuilder solution, and instead we're using Entity Framework, what this would look like. Well, that doesn't look like a port to me. That looks like a rewrite. It's very different than what we had, and it's a lot more code. And this is just representing the 3 lines of C# code that I had showed you on the previous slide. We still have to create our data window object deorder customer, which we would call the model. And here you're looking at the code for that. So there's a lot of developer resources available that you can take advantage of as you move forward with the new features of PowerBuilder 2019. And those are all available to you on community.appeon.com. We encourage you to leverage this resource. It has technical Q&A, has code exchange and take a look at code samples, all sorts of technical articles, technical webinars, and especially code exchange. Bruce will be going over some cool stuff showing you how to do 2-factor authentication leveraging some of the new features of PowerBuilder. And you can take advantage of this even if you don't use C#, even if you're just doing a pure client-server application. So that example is posted there, but definitely take advantage of the Q&A as well. And we do regular webinars from time to time. Now, another resource I want to outline for you is the Elevate 2019 conference. While technical Q&A on the community site's very useful, it's different than being at Elevate, getting live training on these new features. So we do hope you guys can make it down. It's October 28th to 30th in Philadelphia. And you can learn more about the conference or register at elevate.appeon.com. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bruce, who's going to take you through these key new features of PowerBuilder 2019 and show you how to use them.
Okay, thanks, Armin. We're going to look at some of the new features that have been added to PowerBuilder 2019. This isn't going to be all of the new features, it's just going to be some of the ones that I thought were particularly important. First thing we're going to look at is themes. So if you go to the application object, you go to the additional properties, and then there's a new theme tab here. Indicates a folder location that the themes are put in, and the default is to not use themes, but there are 4 themes that Appeon has provided you with. So all you need to do to change the look and feel of your application is just change to one of these other themes, and then click apply, and you're done. It's a codeless operation. That's if you want to use one of the built-in themes. I've created a little sample app here that kind of shows you what the different themes look like. Now what I've done is there's also a method called apply theme that can be used to set the theme dynamically, and that happens when I select one on this drop-down. So you can see what all those different themes are. And then you can see how it affects all the different controls. You notice I've also got a second directory here. This is where I've created a custom theme. This is a theme I created. And the reason you can do that is because the themes are basically done like a cascading style sheet. So if I go to this directory here where my theme is at, there's the folder that has the theme name, and you'll see a whole bunch of bitmaps here, bitmaps and PNG files. Those are used to control how the object actually displays in the IDE. So you don't only have control over the color, you can actually change completely how it's rendered by changing the icon. The other important piece here is this theme.json file. This is the cascading style sheet similar approach here, so that for every control and for each of the different states for the control and for whatever state it's in, so there's a normal state, a hover state, but there's also checked, unchecked, intermediate, and this is just for the checkbox. So there's all these different options for all the different controls, and you can tweak every single one of these to customize the theme you want, the way you want it to look. That's if you want to do a custom theme. If you don't want to do a custom theme, you can just go with one of the ones that Appeon already provided for you. Okay, so that's themes. The other one, actually, while we're here on the additional properties button, is this rich text edit. Now that one already is there, and it defaults to the built-in, actually the built-in rich edit control. And there was an option in the original PowerBuilder releases for to use a version of TX text control that you went out and purchased a license for. That's because in the original versions of PowerBuilder, they weren't able to provide you with an OEM version of the TX text control the way that SAP and Sybase had done. But that's changed now with 2017. There is an option now to use the built-in TX text control. They have the OEM version back. And so if you have created an application that makes extensive use of rich text edit, and the new control, this built-in control, wasn't working for you, you can go back and use this one instead. And once again, all you have to do is just change that setting on the application object, hit apply, and it takes effect. The thing I would note though is that you'd only want to use the built-in TX text control if you did have such an application where you made extensive use of RTF and it wasn't working for you. If you wanted to maintain forward compatibility with changes to the RTF standard, and you don't have something that's broken by using the new control, I'd say use the new control, because that's the one that Appeon is going to continue to make improvements to as time goes on. Okay, so that's enough about the rich text edit. Here's a big important feature. I'm going to go to the New tab, and you'll see there's a new target here called CSharp Projects. Now this isn't like the old .NET Web Service and .NET Assembly, where you coded in PowerScript and then it converted it to C# in the background. This is actually coding in C#. So we're going to click OK there, and if you have the cloud version of PowerBuilder or above, you'll get this SnapDevelop IDE included. I'll give it a second to come up here. There we go. And so it has a number of different project types. These are all non-visual. It doesn't support any visual development. So we've got .NET Core Web API. That's if you want to create REST web services that your PowerBuilder project or any application can call. Or you can create a console app, or you can create a what's called a class library. That's a .NET assembly that you might be able to use in another .NET project, or using a COM callable wrapper from PowerBuilder. So let's go ahead and look at this in some detail. We're going to assume that we've got a two-tier client-server application that we want to convert to three-tier. In fact, if I go back to PowerBuilder IDE, I've got one here. And so in the open event of the application, I'm connecting to the database and opening my window, close event, disconnect from the database, and then in the window itself, in the retrieve button here, basically just doing retrieve from the database, and after the user's made some changes, the updates and commits. So pretty simple, and we will run that, make sure it actually works. Change the value here. Yeah, so it's all working. Okay, so let's look at creating that as a three-tier, or making that into a three-tier application. So I'm going to do is going in here and create a new ASP.NET Core Web API application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from a sample code here. I'm going to use .NET Data Store. That's the one that's going to make a little bit more sense to PowerBuilder developers. There's a couple other paths you can follow, but this is the one that's going to result in you're having to do the least code, and code that's more familiar to you. So I'll just call this test for now. Okay, and what you're going to see here is it generates a sample application, and it's got a README here where you could go out and download a SQL Server database and get the sample code working against that database. But what I want to do here is actually take this sample code and modify it to support the app I'm trying to migrate. So I'm going to go back to PowerBuilder here, and the next thing I'm going to do is take my data window and hit right-click on it and hit Generate C# Model. And it's going to prompt me here for a minute for a database connection to use. It opens up this window, and I can do the export from here. Now you can actually bulk select data windows and do more than one at a time. I've only just got the one data window, so that's just the only one I'm doing. I'm going to find our C# project. And then I'm going to indicate that I'm going to put this into the data windows folder in the new project. Okay, so I've exported the data window. I'm going to go back to the C# code now. It lets me know that the source got updated from outside the IDE, so I'm doing a refresh. So we have noticed a number of folders here, and that's because this project is, as you saw from the name of the template, is an MVC, Model View Controller based design. And so there's what we have is the data windows, which serve as our model. And this is what actually interacts with the database. We have the services, which is in this case is our view, and then we have the controller. So we're just going to modify these slightly. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of the data windows they provided, because I don't need them. I'm just going to use the data window I just exported. That's this one here. Okay, and that retrieves customers. So I'm going to go into my sample service, my interface, and I'm going to change a few things here. I'm just going to make this retrieve rather than retrieve one. And then the only other thing I'm going to need is an update. I don't care about those other methods, so I'm just going to take them out. And I'm going to change this name to customers because that's actually what I'm retrieving, and it would be confusing if I named my customer data store departments. Okay, so we've updated our service interface, so it just has retrieve and update methods because that's basically all our two-tier app is doing. I'm going to go to the implementation now. You can see that you notice these little red squigglies come up, and it actually shows like show potential fixes. I'm not going to do that in this case, but you can see how that works later. And we'll also see how the autocomplete works. So it is a full-featured C# IDE. So in my retrieve method, this is retrieve, not retrieve one. I'm going to change the data window it's using, and let's remove the argument there. So our retrieve is done. Don't need that method, don't need that method, and here's my other method, and I'm just going to change this to customers just for clarity. And you see the auto complete working there. And get rid of the delete. I don't want that one either. And now the red squiggly's gone away on the interface because I've actually implemented the interface just the way I modified it. Okay, so that's the changes to the service. I'm going to go change the controller as well. This is the thing that actually exposes the services to the basically to the internet, and how the URL paths are resolved. So there's no ID value there. I'm going to change this to the customers. That's our data transfer object. Now you still have to see it's still going to have a red squiggly on it because the IDE doesn't know where that class is coming from, and so I'm going to hover over here and show potential fixes, and it shows me I can do the import, and I've done the import and it goes away. So a little bit more of the IntelliSense there. Also, my retrieve, since I'm retrieving more than one here, I'm retrieving a list. I'm going to change this to list. No argument there. And once again, change this to customers because that's what I'm really returning. Oh, I spelled it wrong up here. That's a problem. There we go. Now, I'm not going to do first a default because I'm returning a list here, so I'm going to use the IntelliSense here to say as enumerable d customers and then to list. Okay. And I'm missing a bracket up there. Okay, that's my retrieve method. Get rid of all this. And this is my update. Once again, I'm going to make it customers. And get rid of my delete method. Okay, so my controller's done. One other change I'm going to make here, it's not really necessary now, but it will become useful when we go to document this. Let's say from body there, to indicate that the data is being sent not in the URL but in the body of the post request. Okay, so I'm done here. Let's take a look at the startup file. When I did the export of the data window, it put an entry here in the app settings.json file. So I'm going to copy that out, and I'm going to put it in here. This is our connection to the database is established. And we're done there. That's our data context. We don't need to change that. Do want to go and make one more change here. When this application is run using F5, there's a URL it's told to go to by default, and that's not the URL that we have anymore. We're not using retrieve1, we're using retrieve. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. And we got data back, so our service is working. There's our customer data coming back. So now I've got a working REST API that I can use from the PowerBuilder client. So let's go see what we need to do to the PowerBuilder client to make it work. So I'm going to go back to the application open event, and I don't need to connect to a database anymore. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go to the global variables. And I am going to create an instance of REST client, or declare it there. So in the open event of the application now, we're not going to connect to the database anymore. Instead, we're going to set up our REST client. Okay. Now, a couple things to note here. We've created the REST client. We're setting the content type to indicate that we're going to be passing JSON back and forth. And then we also have this accept encoding header that says gzip. What that does is it tells the service we're calling that we can take compressed data, that we can take the JSON, compress it down using gzip, and then send it down to us. And if the service does that, that flag indicates that we know how to handle that. And that is the case. PowerBuilder will automatically decompress gzip data if it's received in that format. So all you need to do in order to support that is just add this request header, and it automatically happens. Let's go to the close event. We're not going to disconnect from the database anymore. Instead, we're just going to destroy the client, the REST client. Okay, so we're done with our application. Let's go take a look at the window. We're not going to retrieve from the database anymore. What we're going to do is use the REST client to retrieve the data. And that's just done using the retrieve method of the REST client. So you pass in the data window and the URL that's used to retrieve the data. And then we go to our update, and we're no longer going to use the database update. but we're going to use that update method in our service. Now, the reason this works is because by default, what PowerBuilder will generate for the submit request is what's called data window JSON format, and that has state flags in the JSON that indicates which rows are inserted, which ones are deleted, and which ones are updated. It's not a standard JSON format. It's not the bare JSON format. You can generate data using the bare JSON format, but then you're going to have separate methods in your service for insert, update, and delete, because there's no state information in the JSON to handle that. But if all we're worried about is creating a client or a service that for PowerBuilder client, we can just use the single update method and send the data window JSON, which is what we're going to do here. Now this response, this is if there's any error messages that will come back on that response. So I'm going to do an accept text. Now if you're doing an update, by default the update automatically does an accept text. So we're going to do one manually here. Then we're going to submit the JSON, the data window JSON that has all the inserts, updates, and deletes in the one update. And then when the update is complete, we'll do a reset update, because the data window doesn't know that an update's been done. So that's how we let it know the update's been done and we're finished. Okay, so let's run this, see how it works. So we'll go ahead and retrieve. Okay, that looks good. Let's go update something. And it all worked. That's great. Okay, so that is doing a 2-tier to 3-tier conversion using the CSharp IDE. Once again, in cloud or above. Let's go back to the CSharp project for a minute. Okay, so one of the other features that's available here is NuGet integration, and we're going to use that to extend the capabilities of this application. I mentioned a little bit earlier about documentation. So I'm going to go to the test project here. I'm going to go to manage NuGet packages, and there's a utility out there called Swagger that automatically documents REST APIs. We're going to look for it actually by typing swashbuckler. And what this is swashbuckle at ASP.NET. Okay, core. That's the guy we want. Now, what this is NuGet. This is a package manager for the .NET ecosystem. If you look at the information about NuGet, there are 156,000 plus packages out there, all available for download into your C# project. That means you don't have to wait for Appeon to develop new features in the C# targets. If you can find a library out there that does what you need to do and you're comfortable with the license terms, you can just search for it here. You click on install. It'll tell you what it's about to do, and then it will show you the license agreements. So you can check each of the license agreements to make sure that it's something you're comfortable with. I know that Swashbuckler is open source, so I'm comfortable with installing that. So now it's been added to our project, and we're just going to make a couple more code changes here. We're going to go into our startup file. In this configuration services section, we're just going to add a couple more lines of code here. And there's documentation for Swashbuckler. It tells you what you need to add here. And down in the configure section, there's a couple lines we're going to add here as well. Okay, and I'm surprised we're not getting an error here, but just to make sure, I'm going to add my using clause. Okay, so that's all we needed to do. I'm going to run the application again. So it's not going to look any different when it comes up. It's still returning the JSON. But what we have now is there's a new URL. It starts off with the same base, but then it's Swagger. And that's my demo, my data store demo service. There's the retrieve method. There's the update method. I click on the get method. It actually shows me what the what it's going to try to return. And there's an option here too as well to try it out. And we hit execute, and it actually executes it, and there's actual data. So it does that for all the methods. It just scans every method in your REST API and automatically creates this documentation for it. And you know, while that's impressive, that wasn't the main reason I wanted to show you that. What I wanted to show you was all the different kinds of capability that's out there that you can just download and install and implement right away in your C# applications created using SnapDevelop. Okay, so that's enough about the C# IDE. Let's go back to PowerBuilder IDE. You know, we've got this capability now to use REST APIs, but it doesn't have to be the stuff you develop with SnapDevelop. There are lots of other REST APIs out there, and I'm going to show you now how you can use the REST client to access third-party APIs. The particular one we're going to be using is called AirMap. What AirMap is it's a service where if you fly drones, you register your flight path that you intend to use, you intend to take your drone on with the AirMap, and it will report back to you all the airspace restrictions you need to comply with in order to be a well-behaved drone operator. So we're going to look at how we can call that from PowerBuilder. So it requires, I should have pointed that out here, it requires a JSON Web Token, JWT. So that's one of the new features that was added here in 2019, was the ability to request and submit those JSON Web Tokens. So we're going to look at, this is the method I put together to request the JSON Web Token. So you look at the documentation for the site, and it tells you this is the parameters you need to send in a JSON payload, including the username, password, and then it will send back the token, and it sends it back within a larger structure. So there's an access token. There's also a refresh token. What we need to get is this access token, because that's the indication that we've authenticated to the application, and then that token needs to be passed back on every subsequent request we make to the service. So we go back over here. There's where I'm putting together my, I'm using the JSON generator to do it, which was a new feature in 2017. You could have, I could have just put this together as a literal string as well. I just thought it was a little easier to maintain this way. I get that JSON payload. I use this new get JWT token method that's on the REST client. I give it the URL and send in my request and get the token back. And I'm going to populate this MLE with the token so you can see what it looks like. And then after I've gotten a token back, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the JSON parser to strip out the access token, the piece we actually need to pass back on every subsequent request. And down here is now where I'm taking my REST client. This is something else that the AirMap required, was that I pass back the API key on a header and then my token. And then I call this profile method. Now this profile method has information about me, and so it requires me to authenticate before it actually will pass that information back down, and then I'll take that response and I'll put it in that MLE as well. So let's see what this looks like. Yeah, that one. So that's what our token looks like. There's the access token we got back. We've got a bunch of other information in here, including a refresh token. And then this is calling the service and getting data back. So that's an example of using a standard REST API, but there's other stuff out there we can use as well. And what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at doing two-factor authentication And what two-factor authentication is, you might experience it with your bank, is that when you go to log into the site, it asks you for your username and your password, and your password is something you know. Well, then what it does is it will send you a text message or maybe an email. It sends you some other information that you need to retrieve on something you have in order to provide it back to the service. So you have to have your phone in order to get the text message, in order to input the value they gave you. That's what the two-factor means. Two-factor means there's something you know, your password, and something you have, your phone or some other means of getting the code they're providing. And the idea is that somebody might get a hold of your password, or they might get a hold of your phone, but the chances that they could get a hold of your password and your phone are much rarer than getting just one of those items. And so if a user does get your password, if somebody does get your password, they can't access the site because they don't have your phone, and they can't input the code that's been sent to you. So that's one way of doing two-factor authentication. Another way of doing two-factor authentication is through a utility such as Google Authenticator. And what this is, Google Authenticator and various services like it. Authy is one of these other services. In fact, Authy accepts Google Authenticator barcodes and supports the very same approach. What happens with Google Authenticator is it creates what's called a one-time time-based password. It generates a new one every 30 seconds. So you install the application, the Google Authenticator application on your phone. You register the app with a phone, and then every 30 seconds after that, it spits out a new PIN code to use for the application. When you go to use the application, you enter your username and your password, and then you enter the PIN code that's coming off your device. Now the device isn't talking to this app or to Google at this point. It's doing it entirely based on a secret key that was established when you first registered the app and the current time. And what the application then does is it takes the current time, it knows the secret key that you were assigned when you registered the app, and then it also calculates what the code should be, and then compares the two codes. If the two codes are the same, they know that you not only know your password, but you've got your phone with the Google Authenticator app on it, and you're able to enter the appropriate value. In order to first register the app, though, what we're going to do in our PowerBuilder app is we're going to call a Google API that generates QR codes. So we take a look at this. Let's take a look at the window first. So in the window, basically, I just have the name of my application. I just called it Google Authenticator Demo. My user ID, which is my email address. And this is the secret code, not a terribly complex one, that is unique to me as the user. That's going to be used to register with the Google Authenticator app. And what happens here is we take the key, the secret key. It wasn't terribly secret. I showed it to you, but in the real world, you wouldn't be showing the key. We base 32 encode it. Now, base 32 is a bit of a esoteric encoding format. The one that was introduced in the coder object in PowerBuilder was base 64, which is a lot more common. PowerBuilder natively can't do base 32 encoding, so I created a object that does it for me. In any event, we base 32 encode the key. We take that and we create a URL from it. Then we URL encode it, and so this did come from the coder object that was introduced in 2017. And now I'm going to put together a larger URL that makes a call to this charting API at Google. And I'm going to use the HTTP client rather than the REST client. The REST client is great for calling REST APIs, but if you want to do other internet activities such as this Google API to generate charts, I'm going to use the HTTP client, which is a little bit of a lower level utility. It operates at a more base level than just, but it also does a lot more than just REST APIs. So in any event, I'm going to send a GET request to the URL, and the response bodies is going to send me back an image, which I'm just going to display on the window. So that QR code will come up. That's what we scan with Google, and that's what registers it with the app. At that point, it just starts generating those PIN codes, and what we're going to do is we're also going to generate the PIN codes. To do that, we're going to take that key value again, we're going to HMAC SHA it, and so this is where the crypto object that was introduced in 2017 comes into play. And then there's a bunch of complicated math that goes into parsing out that encrypted value and then generating a PIN value from it. So I'm not going to go into the details of how that works. We're just going to show it. So here's the app. I'm going to run that. Okay. I'm going to say generate QR code, and then the QR code comes up. So I'm going to grab my iPad here. There's my iPad. I'm going to click on the Google Authenticator app there in the bottom right corner. It's going to say begin setup. I'll say scan barcode. It's going to see that barcode, and it just generated the 6-digit PIN value there. What I'm going to do here is in the PowerBuilder app, I'm going to click validate, and it's going to generate a PIN value as well. And if all worked, yeah, the PIN values are the same. So that means I would then be authenticated to the application. Notice how it's flashing red. This is Google warning you, or the Google app warning you that 30 seconds have expired, and it's generating a new PIN. So if I go over here and click validate again, I should get that very same PIN value again. So everything is working there. Anyway, that's what I had to show you. It's not every feature that's available in PowerBuilder 2019, but it's a lot of them. And I hope you enjoyed learning about it as much as I enjoyed showing it to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bruce, for showing all that great stuff and helping us understand how to benefit from all these new features of PowerBuilder 2019. So now we're going to open it up to the audience to do Q&A. Please go ahead and expand the webinar console, and you can ask your questions through the console. If we're not able to answer all your questions on the air, we'll later try our best to respond to you via email.